begin speaking when I've invited you in to do so. And similarly to our attendees in the chamber, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, again, press the button to let us know that your hand is being raised, and that I can then come to you and ask you to address the chamber with your question or your comment. Okay. We aren't voting on anything this afternoon, so I won't go through any voting points at the moment. But now I'll officially just open the meeting. So Prynhawn da pawb, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Learning Committee on Monday, the 22nd of January. And please note that this meeting may be recorded and broadcast via the authority's internet site. And images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes. So the agenda item we go to first of all, of course, is apologies for absence. And I just need to note that unfortunately our Sue Walker was called away on some urgent personal matters earlier today, so she's unable to join us this afternoon. But of course we have got our cabinet member Michelle with us, and of course we've got our officer Andrea with us as well. Okay, if there's any particular questions or items for Sue, we'll carry those forward. And secondly, Hannah O'Neill has given her apologies as well, hasn't she? So they are the only apologies I've had. We have got my Vice Chair, Councillor Gareth Lewis, on screen, Lawrence and Karen. Welcome to the meeting on screen. And just an official welcome, really, to Karen on screen. Karen Lewis. Karen is our new co-opted member, joined us in the pre-meet last week. So welcome along to the meeting this afternoon, Karen. Item number 2, declarations of interest. So colleagues, are there any declarations of interest in relation to any matters we're discussing this afternoon? No? Okay, therefore we'll move straight on to agenda item number 3. Oh, it's remiss of me. I do apologise. Before we go straight on to agenda item number 3, we've got our colleagues here from Central South Consortia today, some of whom you've met before. We've got a really good working relationship with our colleagues, so welcome again to the Scrutiny meeting this afternoon. I know that our cabinet member is going to introduce the item in a second, but could I just ask you to officially introduce yourselves? Clara, I'll start with you. If you just want to pop your mic on and just introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Clara Seary. I'm the Managing Director at Central South Consortium.
Prynhawn da, good afternoon. I'm Helen Power. I'm the Principal Improvement Partner for Merthyr Tydfil.
Prynhawn da, I'm Natalie Gould. I'm Assistant Director for Curriculum and Professional Learning at CSE.
Prynhawn da, good afternoon. It's good to see you this afternoon. I'm Andrew Williams, Assistant Director at Central South.
Croeso, thanks guys, apologies for that, but thank you for introducing yourselves and welcome along to the meeting. Okay, so agenda item number 3 is the effectiveness of Central South Consortia to consider the report within our agenda papers this afternoon. And I'm just going to hand over to Councillor Michelle Jones.
Thank you, Lisa. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the current position of the Central South Consortium. And as the Chair's already said, we welcome to this meeting Clara, the Managing Director of the Consortium, and other members of her senior team, including Helen, who is our Principal Improvement Partner for Merthyr. And as such, she acts as the main liaison person with Andrea, our own Head of Achievement and Wellbeing. Whilst it doesn't seem that long ago since officers from the consortium met with the Scrutiny Committee, this report gives an overview of the work of their work in our schools over the last academic year. The report attached at Appendix 1 aims to provide members with information relating to progress of our schools in 22-23, in particular against the priorities relating to our RAS strategy. Alongside this report to Scrutiny, the consortium provides a termly report to our director. Officers from the consortium also provide information for the departmental team around the school meetings. As the portfolio lead, I attend the joint committee meetings of the consortium, where the regional overview is discussed, but our interest this evening is obviously on our schools in Merthyr Tydfil. So just taking you to recommendation then 2.1, scrutiny members to discuss the content of this report and the appendix and consider whether any further information should be presented. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for that. Colleagues from Central South, did you want to go straight into questioning, or did anybody want to give an overview at all, or straight into questioning? Great, okay, no problem at all. Therefore, I'll open it up to the floor and to our colleagues online as well. Do we have any questions for our guests or our cabinet member or our officer today? Okay, Paul, I'm going to bring you in first.
Thank you very much. Can I refer you then to page 3, where you talk about then the area that CSCS covers? Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I'm interested then in whether or not you've noticed any differences in the characteristics between the 5 regions, especially then the differences between, let's say, the Vale and ourselves, with indicators such as free school meals, and thereby, does this lead to any different issues arising that you notice then in your work within our patch?
Thank you for that. I think I'll make a start with the answer, and I'm sure my colleagues will come in and add some information to it. Yes, there are significant differences across all 5 local authorities within the region. However, I think one of the things that is important to note is that the support that's provided is based on the needs of the individual schools within each of the local authorities. So we work with Merthyr, with Sue, with Andrea and the team. We've co-constructed the RARS strategy so that it is linked into the specifics of Merthyr. There is some work that we do that is generic across all 5 local authorities, so particularly around curriculum work and professional learning. So NQT support is similar. NPQH, so the national qualifications for head teachers and middle leaders, are the same, but the support that goes into schools is bespoke. The other advantage to being part of a region and having those areas that are completely different to Merthyr is being able to take that practice that works in other areas and sharing that practice with Merthyr, but also taking the practice in Merthyr schools and showing that, you know, there are some fantastic practices across the schools and being able to share that wider across the region. I don't know, colleagues, if anyone else wants to add.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Thank you, Paul. I think what's very specific to Merthyr as well is that we have that bespoke approach with the RARS support. So there are similar types of things in other LAs, but I think this is very specific to Merthyr. And so the work that we're carrying out, for example, at the moment, my team of improvement partners in conjunction with Natalie's team, we're looking at some reviews and feedback from the oracy and vocabulary work that took place several years ago. And we're doing that in conjunction with Andrea and Sue's request to see where are schools now with their Voice 21, with their oracy work, their vocabulary. So there are very specific things that we would do in Merthyr that may not occur in other LAs.
Thank you for that. If I can ask another question, if I may. On page 5, you tell us about great work that you're doing then in helping us prepare then for Estin. However, we know that on inspection in the past year, we haven't been quite so successful then in terms of the ratings then that Estin have given us. We have 2 schools in special measures and 1 in need of significant improvement. The question is did you see this coming?
Thank you. In terms of the inspections that you're discussing there, I would say for 2 of the schools in particular, it was expected in a way that there would be maybe some issues there. There were some concerns about stability, about leadership. So I think from our organisation, and I'd only just started working for the organisation then, but from what I understand, there was a lot of support put in place to support those schools from the professional learning team, from the improvement partner team, and where you've got instability of leadership, that can affect then an Estin inspection. And I know for 2 of those settings, and for one of the other settings, there was very new leadership. So that sometimes can affect an Estin inspection. But for those 2 in particular, I know there was a lot of preparation work and a lot of knowledge that these these schools were causing some problems and some issues, and those were still ongoing, and those sorts of meetings would have been held with the local authority as well in how to mitigate and ensure that the inspection would have gone as successful as possible, but with that understanding that there were issues there, particularly with leadership. I don't know, Andrew, you may want to come in there.
I've got a very small amount to add to what Helen's just said to us, but we were acutely aware that two of those schools in particular had significant difficulties, significant amounts of support were deployed, and there was an ongoing dialogue between us, the local authority, and the settings around the support that was in those schools to ensure that they're having the best possible outcome they could for the learners. I think for me, inspection is only one indicator of success of a school. It's just almost inspection go in and they come out with an outcome at the end of it, but the reality is it's making sure that no other schools in Merthyr are in a similar position, and it's that ongoing dialogue between us and the local authority to ensure that they're supported the best they can be. But to reiterate, neither of the three of those schools weren't a surprise to us. Two particularly had significant amounts of support, and the third one was having support as well.
If I can come back to you on that one, as I understand it, the third one that you mentioned then did come as a bit of a surprise then to us all. And I think the LA then, in the support that they've been providing as well, would acknowledge that there's a lot of work that's still going to be needed there. What I'm trying to drive at is about why there was no safety mechanisms then to flag this up in advance. Why was it that we arrived at essence inspection, which we know can sometimes be subjective and not objective? Why that came as a surprise to us all?
I don't think it was necessarily a surprise. I think we were aware that there was the issues around the leadership within that school. We'd started to address them. As Helen said, it was new leadership. We started to address them, and we'd looked to put a support plan in place to enable that to happen. Several members of our team were going in and doing some work in the school. However, as Helen said, it was new leadership. It was identified too late before the inspection. Whereas if it had been as if it had been existing leadership that wasn't so new, we would have done more support in the school, but it was new leadership, and suddenly the gaps in the ability of the school started to emerge, and they started to emerge very early on in September, which is when I know I met with Andrew, and Andrew and I had a conversation around it, and that's when we started to put the support in.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll give way for the moment. I've got other questions, but I know that plenty of colleagues here then have got questions of their own. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to bring in Jacob in the chamber next, and then just my colleagues online. Lawrence, I'll call you in next, and then Gareth. Okay, so Jacob, over to you.
Hi, I've got just a few questions. If we go to page 7 of the report, 3.4, the ALPS analysis, there's mention about a VA value added. Could you give a little bit of context as to that means in regards to the report?
Yes, certainly. Yes, certainly, Jacob. With the ALPS there, the ALPS use Welsh National Assessment data and CAT scores of pupils to calculate the value added. So they'll look at what those scores were of those pupils, what their national assessment data was in literacy, numeracy, other areas as well, and the cognitive assessment test scores as well. And they will calculate the value added. So have those learners really made sufficient progress? So in that ALPS analysis there, you've probably seen yourself, it's quite variable, and you've got some areas there where it seems some learners haven't maybe made as much progress as they could have done, but that is one form, and ALPS does look at data and comparisons across with England and other areas of the UK as well. If we look at the data, and I know my colleague Andrea May from the local authority has produced some documentation for you as members on this, when we look this year at comparisons of learner outcomes in Merthyr schools up against Welsh averages, the gap is closing. So there are some positive stories when we look at that particular data this year. There are other areas I know that are positive in terms of the All Wales data set. So this year now we've got the performance measures that have come back. All that information has gone. I know we've got some secondary colleagues and governors here today. So that information has gone to schools where they've done some analysis. And there are some positive stories there as well, where Merthyr learners are closing that gap, are making some progress. So although the ALPS there can look maybe concerning when we look at other types of data, we can see that learners have made progress. But I know in Merthyr there's no sense of complacency at all, even where there have been improvements. It's always that sense in the secondary schools and in all schools that I've come across of wanting to do even better and to make those improvements.
So within that context, so obviously in the report it talks about how there seems to be an apparent that girls, as it says, that girls have a stronger value added compared to boys. Has there been a bit more of a deep dive into that to see what are the key reasons why girls seem to be doing better than boys in key subjects in schools?
There will have been some analysis in all the 4 secondary schools there. So we have an improvement partner who works across all 4 schools. And I know that he's working closely and doing a lot of peer work in bringing the schools together to look at those types of reasons. So I don't have a definitive answer on that, but I know some really robust self-evaluation work has been going on in those schools to look at that, what the reasons behind it and what can be done then to improve so that there's less of a gender gap, and that work's ongoing.
Okay, and just one last thing about the ALS analysis. I noticed looking through it, there doesn't seem to be any figures in regards to value added for those that might be who are ALN or non-ALN. Could you explain why there doesn't seem to be any figures or statistics about that?
Right, good question. These are the headlines, but in terms of ALN, I can go back and look to see if we've got some information for you and we'll be able to get that to you. I don't have that at the current time.
Okay. Just one last thing. If we could go to page 30, 7.3, raising attainment of disadvantaged youngsters.
Page 30.
Yeah, page 30, sorry, yeah.
So page 30.
7.3, raising the attainment of disadvantaged youngsters. So whilst reading that, I noticed that it explains that in the programme that only 2 schools, Penedra and Cyfarthfa High School, had taken part in the programme. Could you explain why only these 2 particular schools were able to partake in the programme?
Certainly. At the time, as far as I understand for RADI, there was just funding for the 2 schools. So the funding that came for the RADI project was spread across all of the local authority schools. And so not all the schools in every LA were able to take part, but we've definitely got funding this year for all 4 schools if the local authority would like to take that on.
But there was no particular reason for Penedra and Cyfarthfa High School. It's just because of funding, is it?
Yes.
Right. Within the program, could you explain what the benefits of the program was for those eligible to partake, and if there was any areas of improvement for the program?
That programme is very focused on raising aspirations, so particularly for learners who are disadvantaged. So the whole ethos and approach for the RADI programme is, for example, if you've got your class of children and you're aware that you've got children there who are disadvantaged, as a teacher and as staff, you are raising your aspirations and your hopes for those children to be as high as possible. And you will be inflating that almost so that you're doing as much as you can. Then you've got high aspirations in the classroom by the teachers and the learning support staff. And that culture then should permeate the school. So there is very much not not, oh, those poor children, but very much we can do the best we can for those children and use our funds so that they can achieve the best. So it's a little bit about using all the strategies that you can to support those learners with their progress, but also it's very much a mindset that in the schools, using that approach, there is that that culture of high aspirations for those children.
And what strategies that were used to achieve those goals? Was it more of an educational sense then, like a classroom, or was it more of an active one where like you participate in an activity?
In terms of strategies, there would be a mix, and I know some of the strategies as well would be around involving parents, so that parents, because schools can do a certain amount, you also want to be bringing in parents so that they share those high aspirations and that we're helping them. So there would have been a mix of working with the community, but also working with schools and making sure the teaching and learning and the pastoral support can be the best it can be for those learners.
Okay. So in the document, it explains that obviously this is for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. Could you clarify what you mean as a disadvantaged background? Are you speaking more economically? Are you talking about if they have a criminal record? Is there something if they have a difficult of learning? Could you maybe clarify what it means in the program for a disadvantaged background?
Okay, it could mean disadvantaged in its broadest sense. So it could be economic, it could be other social issues. Natalie, I don't know if you've got any other information on that. Actually, ask my colleague.
No, that's fine. So historically, we'd look at free school meals children, but we all know that that's just one indicator. So poverty more widely, as you say, it could be any vulnerable group of learners. And particularly when you're looking at family engagement, when you're looking at quality of teaching and learning, you would target certain pupils based on attendance information, exclusions information, target setting, all of those above factors. So we would be generally looking at raising those aspirations, raising standards, raising quality, but there would be some targeting of whoever the school decides would be the vulnerable learners to target.
Yeah, I think that's me done. Thank you for answering my questions.
Well, Jacob, thank you ever so much. Some really good in-depth questioning there as well. We appreciate it. Thank you. Lawrence, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Following up on Paul's question, in the context of the report on section 11.3 support for school improvement, which is on page 62, it mentions the strengths of quoted there, the first 4 bullet points. A good chance to look, but it raises a question for me following Paul, as I said, whether the support put in place for those schools was adequate, and how do you and the lack of ability to deal with the leadership issues that you mentioned. How do you respond to that?
Lawrence.
Yeah.
Shall I come in and answer that? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
Lawrence, what we'll do is we'll just come in and maybe need you to just repeat some elements of that, but let Andrew come in first and then we'll take it from there.
Thanks for the question, Lawrence. It's a really valid and useful question, and it's something back at base that we talk around a lot. We've got a whole range of really knowledgeable, skilled people back at base that are able to work with schools in a range of settings, in a range of capacities. One of the things that we do is we keep a very tight record that we share with the school and the local authority around all the support that goes in, and that support is really wide ranging. We right from leadership support all the way through, right the way through to real classroom based practice and pedagogy. One of the things though that we've noted is we don't own the impact. We can't own the impact of our work. We can go in, we can support, we can work with the school, but the impact is very much owned by the school. So we can go in and do the piece of work, But ultimately, when we walk away from the school's got to be in a position to be able to deliver that support themselves and to deliver the improvement themselves. In our best schools, we go in, we do the piece of work with the school, we revisit, a few weeks later, a few months later, and we can see they've taken on that support and it's developed and it's embedded within the practice of the school. In our schools that are struggling and making more limited progress, we go in, we offer the support, we withdraw, we go back to revisit, and then we see it's not embedded in practice because within the school there isn't anyone driving that and ensuring the accountability level. At the leadership point, we've got a range of different strategies to support leadership, but ultimately leadership sits with the leaders in the school, and the ownership of that sits with the governing bodies in the school as well. We can support leaders, but ultimately it's down to schools and governing bodies in association with the local authority to tackle those leaders if those leaders aren't actually delivering. We've got a range of support. We've got systems leaders, which are current practicing head teachers that go in and work alongside head teachers that need development. We've also got RLGs, really strong regional leads for governance that go in and work alongside governing bodies. So we've got some on the ground powerful people to go in and do the support work in schools. But ultimately, leadership is one of the biggest things to change if the capacity for change isn't there within the leadership.
Okay, thank you. Lawrence, did you want to come back on anything or add anything to that?
Well, as regards the leadership then, if you mentioned the governing body is ultimately responsible, can you or anybody give a case where that where CSE has gone to the governing body and expressed a concern that the head teacher or leadership team is failing?
That comes through in a number of Yeah, that comes through in a number of ways, and quite often that comes through via a warning notice from the local authority. And I know Sue, the director, is very strong on how she uses warning notices to best effect. And there's a phrase which doesn't sound particularly nice, but it's a phrase about proving failure, and it's about looking at the impact of all the support that's gone into the school, and then looking at the reasons why that hasn't worked, and then we're able to provide that information to the local authority. Then the local authority can make the decision on whether it's valid to issue a warning notice with notices of recommendations on areas to improve, and that we can work with the governing body then alongside the local authority and looking at what those recommendations look like. And then if those are met, great, and if they're not met, and then there's another course of action that the local authority can support the governing body around.
What I would ask then, Chair, can we perhaps ask the officers then whether, in the case that of the schools that we mentioned that are known about, whether warning notices were given regarding the leadership in those schools? I'll leave that for now. The other thing then, it was mentioned about the fact that schools then, as I say, professional leadership and professional learning, etc., and the impact of that learning, as you said, is not known until the next sort of phase of monitoring, etc. I just wonder again, to what degree does it take in order to wait until such time as action is taken in order to address the fact that these things are not happening? It just seems to me it could go on until such time as Estin comes along.
I can assure you, I mean, that could be a perception, but I can assure you that's not the case. In some of our schools, particularly in Merthyr, improvement partners are visiting weekly, if not 3 times a week. A couple of schools that we've already mentioned today, the improvement partner is almost a regular fixture in the school in its kind of conversations with the school. So when I said they kind of withdraw and go back, that is if a piece of work is in place to allow it to embed, to go back and revisit. But all of the schools in Merthyr are visited regularly by a really dedicated team of improvement partners. And if I were to stick my neck out, I would say that the ratio of improvement partners to Merthyr schools is higher than in some of our other authorities. So Merthyr are getting more access, particularly around our secondary schools in Merthyr. They get a lot more access to improvement partner time.
So dare I say then, schools in Merthyr are causing more concern?
No, not at all. It's about a bespoke approach. So it's making sure that we meet the school with their need. One of the pledges that we made in Central South 3 years ago was we'd work with schools on identifying their priorities for improvement. And once we were all comfortable those priorities were the correct priorities, we would then work alongside the school leadership to determine if they needed our support to be able to meet those priorities. And our pledge was, if you need our support to meet them, we will come in and meet with you and support you in meeting those priorities. A number of schools don't need us. You know, we go in to do regular monitoring visits and that's where it stops. But other schools need a little bit more support and a little bit more intervention to be able to move forward. Particularly around, if you think about some of the big reform agendas in Wales at the moment, you know, Merthyr schools are as vulnerable as any school in Wales around curriculum for Wales, preparedness for that, implementation of that, progress of that. So some schools will be having some additional support around that to make sure they're in the best possible place that they can. But Merthyr schools have got a real mixed bag, and I say Merthyr schools are representative of the schools across our other local authorities as well.
Lawrence, I'm just going to bring Helen in there. Won't be a second.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Lawrence, just to build on what Andrew has said there, really, we've also got systems and processes in place in collaboration with Merthyr LA, where we meet, myself and the improvement partners meet regularly with Sue Walker and Andrea, where we go through every school in detail. So the types of things you're talking about there, you know, we do have that regular dialogue about what's going on in the schools. Our improvement partners are in the schools, apart from those who have been ASOS, and we're just getting into those schools now. But, you know, we have that regular information and update. So my team can confidently say to Sue Walker and Andrea, we know the teaching is good in this school because our improvement partner has been in, maybe somebody as well from Natalie's curriculum team. We've looked at the provision across the school, and we can assure Andrea and Sue that we're happy with the quality of teaching. We also produce some commentaries on a termly basis that the schools can see as well. So where we're summing up where we think the quality of leadership is, the quality of the teaching and learning, the progress that the learners are making. So these are carried out regularly and timely. And if we do have worries, if, for example, an improvement partner has been in and is worried about the standard of work in books that they've seen, or maybe the learning environment isn't where it should be, I have fortnightly meetings with Andrea where I'd be alerting her. And we also have these team around the school meetings where we go in depth and say, maybe we're a bit worried about that school. So however, we've got plans to bring in this support, that support, and we'll update you as soon as possible when our partner's been back in and check in.
Okay, yes, thank you both. Lawrence, did you want to ask any further questions?
Therefore, thank you for your responses and reassurances. So therefore, can I be assured that no school in Merthyr will ever be in significant improvement or special measures again?
I think that's an impossible question to answer, Lawrence, if I'm honest. Estin have brought they're piloting a new framework in schools. We're yet to see the impact of that framework in schools. So it's a question I don't think any of us could necessarily add. A school can rise and fall within the space of a few weeks. If leadership changes, a school can fall within the space of a few weeks, depending on the leadership and a whole range of different factors within the school.
I'll stop there, Chair, because I'm afraid that's opened up another can of worms, what was just said there. All I say is, for a school to say you can turn in a couple of weeks, I'm sorry. No, I'll say no more. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence.
Sorry,
Sorry,
can I
Anne.
just come back there? Is
Yeah.
that okay? What we've seen in a couple of schools is where the head teacher has resigned, Estin have visited, and Estin deemed the leadership to be unstable within the school because they haven't got a substantive head in post at that particular time. So when I said it can rise and fall within the matter of a couple of weeks, if a head resigns and there's no substantive head, Estin might feel there isn't security of leadership within the school, so therefore they might place it in a statutory category. We've got a few examples of that we've had over the last year across the region in Central South.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Lawrence. And I think just mindful of the questioning around leadership, and I know that Sue isn't here today, as I said, I've given her apologies. I know we've got Andrea here as well, but I think, you know, we'll just take that forward because that accountability comes down to Sue and to the local authority. And so we'll just take that particular one forward as one of our actions and reflections from today's meeting. Sorry, I can give you a... Yeah, sorry, I'll bring Andrea in then, 2 seconds.
In response to the question around warning notices, there was a warning notice in one of the schools, which had been put into place. There was also enhanced support for the governing body, and I'm not quite sure of the terminology, so I'm going to use enhanced governing body put into place as well, which was there to provide support and build capacity around the current governing body, because that also comes under aspects of leadership. As well, and the ability and capability to hold the school to account with that. In terms of the school that were perhaps wasn't as expected, the governing body are now very aware, I would say, of where the school is. That's come from the work that Central South has done with the IP, as well as from reviews which we've carried out jointly within the school, and able to give sort of clear recommendations around the work of the PIAP as well. Again, the governing body has been enhanced within that school with some new membership to strengthen that, and again, training for those members have also taken place. So perhaps that gives some assurance around those schools and the improvement journey that the schools are on. And they are on that improvement journey, and a lot of support is in place to try and make sure that doesn't kind of fall back as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity around what the director has done in those areas.
Thank you, Anne. And again, as I said, as a matter of us with scrutiny, we can follow up on that as well, Lawrence. And we can also, you know, dig a little bit deeper outside of this meeting as part of our workshops, etc., just on leadership and Estin and inspection. I'll very briefly touch on that. You know, next week we have got a pilot Lally inspect. Well, we call it, I keep on calling it inspection, so supposed to be called inspection, but a pilot, I'll call it a pilot. So there's a lot of transition for Estin at the moment as they're phasing these new ways of working out as well. So we'll definitely add it to our list for our scrutiny. Thank you, Lawrence. I'm going to come to Gareth Lewis next and then Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Page 18 of the report refers to schools receiving enhanced monitoring. How is that monitoring identified, and are we seeing good outcomes as a result of that enhanced monitoring?
If I start an answer to that, within Central South, we have our framework for school improvement that sets out criteria that could cause schools to have enhanced monitoring, but that's always done in conjunction with the local authority. So if there are concerns within the school, either from a CSC point of view or from officers within the local authority, then that school can move into an enhanced monitoring category, and that then enables progress meetings to take place either on a termly or half-termly basis, and those schools are then held to account for the work that they're doing. We're held to account for the support that we're providing, as are the officers within the local authority, depending on the priorities within the school. Andrew, Helen, I don't know if you want to add anything about any specifics.
Sorry, just to pick up on something Clara said there, it is a conversation, negotiation for three parties. It never comes as a surprise to the school about moving into enhanced monitoring. It's about the school being aware of the needs and the progress the school's making, conversations with the local authority, and as a decision to move it to enhanced monitoring, and that's seen as a support mechanism to be able to support the school tighter in its monitoring processes. So within that, there's a real scrutiny there on, okay, what are the priorities for improvement? how are we all going to work together to ensure that the school has the best access to the support it needs for those priorities. And it's also a way of us being able to provide further information and details to the local authority around any limited progress those schools are making. So there's real clear evidence of support and clear evidence of the progress or lack of that we can then provide for the local authority. But we look at it as a very fluid process, that the old categorisation system, schools were categorised in September, and it was very difficult to move out of that category during the year. The enhanced monitoring and the core support system is a very fluid system that schools will move in and out depending on their need throughout the year. And I think that's been the real success of the system, is because schools feel that they're empowered to be able to be part of the discussions about moving into enhanced or moving out.
Yeah, just to add to that, Gareth, you asked as well about progress that had been made and maybe some coming out of that in enhanced monitoring. So in Merthyr, certainly last year, a primary that was in enhanced monitoring has now been removed from enhanced monitoring. And again, that's through discussions with us in Central South alongside the local authority, and informed by the work of the improvement partner, who through his time in the school could see that things were really improving with the leadership and the teaching and learning. So I was feeding that back to Andrea and Sue, and in one of the team around the school meetings there, and I think the LA felt they had sufficient information as well, and it was a joint agreement then that that school would no longer need that enhanced monitoring.
Good.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you all. Gareth, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. One further question, if I may. We briefly touched on action short of strike earlier, and of course that's now come to an end. Is there a backlog of work that's resulted in for the consortium, and how are you placed with that backlog?
If I start again with that one, yes, during the action short of strike, there were things that we didn't do with schools. However, one of the things that the unions were very clear on is that there wasn't a backlog, it was a fresh start. What it does mean is that there have been changes in schools or changes within the improvement partner team. So it is staff are building relationships again with head teachers, getting to know what's going on in the school, because in some of those schools it's almost been a year since we had free access to those schools. And I think it is about building those relationships, because we've got to have open and honest relationships within schools, otherwise we're not getting to the heart of what needs to improve. So staff are now accessing all of the schools. They are going into schools. They're back onto our work program and moving forwards with that.
Can I add to that as well? In terms of Merthyr, Gareth, for those schools that were ASOS, we've all been warmly welcomed back in. So it's been a very seamless move back. So myself, I've taken on 2 of the schools, and the other improvement partner this week has visited the schools that were ASOS, and we've all had a really warm welcome back, coming back in, and straight away now we've got future dates with the head teachers to come in and look at the work, because that's what we've missed and what we haven't seen is that working alongside leaders to look at the standards and the progress in literacy and across the board. But we've had a lovely warm welcome back, and we look forward now to working alongside leaders to help with all their school improvement priorities.
Thanks. That's good to hear. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you both. Gareth, is that you okay? Yeah.
That's it for me. Thanks, Lisa. Cheers.
Yep, lovely, thank you. So I'm going to come back into the chamber, and I'm going to go to Anna first, and then I'm going to come to Natalie.
Thank you. So there was mention earlier about the raising aspiration, raising standards strategy, and how that was co-created between the local authority and the consortium. So I think there's been discussions within this committee and outside it about whether this strategy is sufficient post-COVID, with all the challenges around attendance and behaviour that have been highlighted during that period. So could I ask for your thoughts on whether you feel it is sufficient, or if there are areas that would need to be amended to make sure that the local authority is suitably able to meet new challenges in schools?
Thank you. Just today at the Education Partnership Panel, we were looking at the revised RARS strategy, which is taking into account that the world has changed since we started with this strategy, and we do have to respond to those changes. So I think there are opportunities to amend it to meet the needs of the community that we're serving now in the circumstances that we are serving. So it isn't a fixed document. So there are changes to that.
Thank you, Clara. I'll just add to that as your chair, if it helps. I just sat in as the interim chair of the Education Partnership Panel this afternoon, and Andrea gave us a very detailed overview as to where we are with RARS and given us that update that some of us have had previously, just with some of the new reiterations of it and how we've had to move forward post-COVID since its initial conception. And so, Andrea, I think it would be okay that we can share some of that with members post this, can't we, just to the stages as to where you're at now. So I'll make sure that's shared with you all. Is that okay, Anna? Back to you.
Thanks. And then 2 questions specifically around the intersection between poverty and attainment within education. So specifically, knowing the challenges around poverty and the numbers of children on free school meals within Merthyr and within the wider region, can I ask, how does Central South Consortium ensure that they bring in staff with sufficient knowledge of the impact of poverty on education and outcomes?
I think in terms of staff, we know that there is a recruitment and retention issue within education at the moment. So one of the ways that we're addressing that is providing professional learning for staff, and making sure that they are aware of strategies that are impactful. As part of the response to that, Central South has created an Enabling Excellence and Equity document, which looks at strategies that schools can use and how they can engage with those learners. Natalie, you want to add?
Yeah, I can add some more detail. So we do have a lead for vulnerable groups, John Welsh, and as Clara said, he's providing training for our staff, so IPs, curriculum and professional learning. He's also at the moment developing a programme for schools on the leadership of vulnerable learners. And again, sharing of practice is really important. So as part of our revision at the moment of our what we call our EEE document, Enabling Equity and Excellence, we're looking at just revising some of the documentation and theory that we've got, but also collating and collecting and sharing case studies across the region and further across Wales, internationally, of where there is success in these areas. So it's not about one person, I suppose, with expertise. It's about trying to upskill all of our staff to have these conversations with schools and then sharing practice across the system.
I don't know what's happening to your mic. Do you want to try it again? There we go.
At least I'm in the right seat this time. Thanks. And then one more, if that's okay. So before Christmas, we heard from heads and governors at the some of the schools that were put into those special categories by Estyn. And I know one in particular was very keen to highlight the particular challenges of the cohort of the children that were attending that school and the sheer numbers of children who would be on free school meals over the course of their life at the school. And so I suppose the question is, to what extent can we expect to see better outcomes in inspections and in all these measures, whilst that underlying level of poverty remains within the cohort?
Thank you, Anna. Yes, it is a concern. I think now, though, there is such an emphasis on progress. So although we are looking at achievement and attainment with the new curriculum and with the way things are in Wales at the moment, and this exciting time with the new curriculum, it is very much about that progress the learners are making. So it may be some of these children may not have achieved what is expected for their age. However, from their starting points when they came in nursery or reception, they have made that progress, and our teams support the learners with that, and support the leaders and the staff in being able to articulate that as well. We always know we've got Estin coming, don't we, in some areas, but if leaders can feel confident that they can show, well, these learners came into us in nursery or in year 7 at this level, this is where they are now, and this is what we've done to support them to achieve that. So you can really celebrate then that progress. And I think we have a published inspection report from a school, Coed Dderwyn in Merthyr, which does have a lot of deprivation, and some learners may be there who may not have achieved where that you'd expect for age, but the staff and the head was able to demonstrate that they had made significant progress from where their starting point was with their rich curriculum and their strong teaching and learning.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, colleagues to my left, if you just turn off your mics, I can just see that they're red. They won't go off. Is that what the issue is?
Yeah.
We are having some mic issues today. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not off now with it. Don't worry. We've got our wonderful team in the corner that people can't see helping us, you see. So diolch. Thank you for that, guys. Anna, are you okay? Yes. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. So I'll go to Natalie next and then Jeff.
Chair. So we talked about free school meals as an indicator of deprivation. Obviously, with primary schools now moving to universal primary free school meals, do you anticipate it's going to be harder to identify those children that are experiencing deprivation, or are they? I know you mentioned when you answered Jacob, there are other measures, but do you think it's going to be a real challenge to identify those children now?
We've seen this happen because we've had other jurisdictions that have had universal free school meals and the applications to free school meals decreased. What we need to do as a system, and it's got to be the whole system working on it, is work with parents and families so that they realise that it's not about the free school meal.
Yeah.
It's not about the child accessing dinner during the day. It is the extra benefits that the school gets through the PDG grant and what other entitlements that child will have because of that eligibility. It is really difficult, and I think lots of schools, and I know local authorities are working on publicity campaigns around this. And I think it's all of our responsibility to keep working with those families and communities. I wish that we had a different name for it, because we talk about free school meals and it isn't. So if we can get our schools calling it, let's be open. It is about the pupil development grant, and your eligibility to access that grant. And I think we've got an opportunity to change. But I think we are all very worried that our most vulnerable pupils and families won't apply for this, so they will lose, schools will lose out.
Yeah.
And in the current climate, that's not going to help anybody. But I think it's got to be a concerted effort to remind parents that this is not about lunch at lunchtime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think two things that really stand out today for me, the fact you said whole system, and I think that when we look at things as sort of, we're looking now at Central South and then we're looking at well-being, understandably we look at those as siloed areas, but as you said, it's whole system, it's bringing everything together, isn't it, that we do. I think another key thing as well is the language. We really need to focus on the language that we use as the education system. I say we because I'm a governor in a school. I think the language that we use is key. It really, really makes a difference in how we communicate the message. So thank you. On to another question. 4.2 of the overview report. Sue said, since accountability measures changed, Central South have presented reports in a different format. How have they changed? Where sort of, how was the reporting changed from where accountability? So where did it go from and where is it now? What's the difference?
If you go back and look at a scrutiny report from pre-pandemic times, there's lots of data. I think there were pages and pages and pages of data. You know, Key Stage 2 data, Key Stage 3 data, lots of data around Key Stage 4. None of those systems are there anymore. The reports, I think, as the years have gone on, have probably got longer because it is becoming much more of a narrative. And the intention as we move forward is to carry on that story of education within Merthyr and the story of schools.
Yeah.
It's very, very challenging because it's much easier if we can have a concise table. So if you've got a better way that we can present this, please do share it with us. We're open to any suggestions.
Yeah, thank you. That could be something we could look at, Chairs, sort of communication channels, because some of the things I wanted to ask you are relating to sort of how we get a multi-directional communication to sort of work with you to, you know, if maybe we think a service could improve, how do we pass that back to you,
Yeah.
to work with the IPs? Prime example being the IP we've got at our school at the moment is absolutely fantastic. I didn't have anything with our first IP to sort of gauge to see how effective the IP was previously. So I thought that it was a standard. But since we've changed IPs, we've now got a new IP, and you'll know when obviously we've chatted briefly. Wow, absolutely fantastic. But there's a marked difference. So yeah, communication and channels and how we work together to get that feedback.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to work with you on any of those
Lovely,
things.
thank you. In the actual report, I've got to double check. Sue has written this with the information that the actual report from the local authority. Has Sue has written this with information
No,
you
we
fed
might
into
have.
it? You've
It was the
actually written it.
overview with
Right.
Andrea.
She's at the overview, and then this is your report.
And then that is
right.
Central
Okay,
South,
just to clarify that. The reason I've asked that is on page 3, it refers to the RAS goals, but it's only listed 4. The RAS goals is actually 5. It doesn't include learners' health and well-being. Is that something that you're not working on? Is it, or something that you do as a smaller priority, or is it the 5 RAS goals should be included? It's relevant because we're looking at well-being after this. So there's 4 on page 3 of the report. We've got 4 bullet point 1.0, 4 RAS goals listed, but there's actually 5 goals to RAS, and the 5th goal, I don't know what order it comes in there, but the one that I was looking at was learners' health and well-being. So I'm wondering whether you are targeted or tasked with that RAS goal as well, or whether that would then sit with, say, public health, where the responsibility for that support lies.
Sorry, Helen. We have far less to do with that one. It's not a direct responsibility. We are a contributing partner rather than a delivery lead.
Perfect, thank you. Lovely. And reference that as well on one of the pages. It says that only 6 Merthyr governors attended the wellbeing session. I was one of them, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Very informative. I saw there's something for us to take forward for our wellbeing workshop with our future work programme, is how we increase participation from governors in relation to that. I'm just going to double check if there's anything else. Excuse me a second. Relating to professional learning, the training that you offer to, obviously I speak as a governor, thank you for the training. There's some really exceptional training. I've attended so many of your courses, and I don't think I've got a bad word to say about any of them. So thank you ever so much for that. When we come to the training sessions, whether it's online or in person, and they've been fantastic, whichever way we access them, you always have the post-training feedback form. Obviously, that's a measure of an effectiveness of the training. Do you have any other measures in place to measure effective training was when you're actually implementing the learning from the training?
So as you say, you know, we have the evaluation there and then. As far as implementation goes, and it's sort of going back to what Andrew said earlier, the IP is there to support the school leadership, school governors, school leadership to implement whatever. So the IP's role would be supporting the school in the first instance in the priorities, ensuring the professional learning they plan in the school matches those priorities, that including governors, and then supporting in the self-evaluation of that. So as a team who provide professional learning, we don't go back into look at how the professional learning has been implemented, but that would be part of the IP's role in supporting the leadership of strategic planning and monitoring and evaluation on, you've been to the training, so what happens next?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks, Natalie. Colleagues, I'm going to come to Jeff, as I said, next. Councillor Clive, you did have your mic on, but you've taken it off. Is that because your question's been answered? Okay, that's fine. And then after Paul, I'm going to conclude on questions after Paul. I'm just mindful my colleagues from Central South Consortia are also responding to RCT scrutiny this evening, so I'm just mindful of time for them. But it also gives us an opportunity to make any comments as well. Okay, so Jeff, I'll come to you next.
Okay, Chair, thank you. Just two questions, if I might, both on the report. One about the economy at 9.5 and one about 7.2 PDG in general terms. So you'll be aware that the Welsh Government have said that their expectations that PDG should support all eligible learners. To reiterate, this includes more able and talented. PDG strategic advisors in consortia are to ensure that this is a priority. So you'll be aware of that. I might be wrong, but I couldn't find any mention of more able and talented in the report. So can I ask if the Welsh Government expect you to look at this and have it as one of your lead roles, why it's not mentioned in our report at all? And can you give us an assurance that this most important subject matter has not escaped your attention? I'm sure it hasn't, but can you give us that reassurance? And if necessary, Chair, could we have an addendum report on just how the CSC supports the LA to support the schools for this cohort of our pupils? Thank
you. If I start with that, I'm sure my colleagues will want to come in. Yes, the PDG is there to support those vulnerable learners, and there should be a particular focus on the more able vulnerable learners. I think you're right, there isn't I don't think there's anything in the report about it, primarily because it hasn't been the primary focus of the work that's been happening within Merthyr schools. However, we have, again, at the Education Partnership panel today, we were talking about this, and we've committed to working with the schools next year on a particular project looking at those more able, vulnerable pupils and how they don't get missed. Because I think where we've got data about pupils, secondary schools, we know are tracking those pupils and doing quite a bit of work to support those pupils. But I think it was rightly raised by the heads today that we do have pupils who are not achieving in their exams. So they've kind of, they're underachieving, but there's still strong evidence from potentially other partners that they are more able and talented, and it's how we pick those pupils up. So there hasn't, I don't believe, been a specific focus on that within Merthyr. However, next year there'll be a section in it.
Jeff, do you want to just put your mic on? Oh, it's back on.
you. Is that okay? Yeah. Could we go to 9.5, the economy? It's just the economy of what you say in your report. And I'm confused. So in 2015, the CSC received £5.4 million. In 22-23, it received 3.6 million. Yet in it, you state that without reducing the quality of service, the CSC state they can ensure costs are minimised without reducing this quality of service provided. Now, that's great. I'm in business. That's a third saving. And if you've made a third saving for the same results, either you weren't very good prior to that, or you've been absolutely brilliant now. So could you perhaps give the information to Andrea? Because Andrea's department has to do lots of things for us. Yeah. And if she can do it for a third less, we can have a third more done for us. So it might sound a bit flippant, and I'm not trying to be flippant about it. I'm trying to say that if you can do it for 3.6 million, how are you making this savings without losing anything?
I think it's not that we haven't lost anything. We haven't had a negative impact on schools. And if you think back over time, part of our remit is to build capacity within schools. So some of the projects that we would have had to do 5-6 years ago, schools have accessed that training and support, and then are now self-sufficient in doing that. So we don't need to carry on doing that. There have been cuts. We don't do the same things that we did 5 years ago. We don't do things in the same way that we used to do them. So one of the big savings for us is we now have far more online training. So that's significantly impacted on costs because we don't have the venue costs that go with big conferences. We are moving back to more face-to-face because of requests from schools. But I think we have streamlined the supports that we offer. We have changed our staffing model. We've streamlined all of our back office services. We don't really have any. And I think it's what we're trying to say in this part is that we have had significant budget cuts. But what we're seeing with the evidence that we've got is that hasn't negatively impacted on schools. As to how long that will be the case, I don't know.
Thank you. Just brief add to that. If that's the case, does that mean that you're going to ask to put the prices up next time?
We have agreed our core funding from local authorities for the coming year, and we have taken a cut in our core contributions.
So you're going to be making even more efficiency savings?
There are certain things that we will have to stop doing. So that's what we're working with local authorities at the moment to look at what the model is.
Thank you. Chair, would we be able to be informed of what that is? Because it says to me that if CSC are not getting paid as much money for whatever reason, then there might be some subject matter that is missed or no longer performed that may well be important to you and I as members of this scrutiny committee.
Yeah, Jeff, as you can imagine, there's a lot of remodelling going on at the moment across all different sectors and all different portfolios, and one of those includes education as well because of budget circumstances, and then that impacts down the line. So yeah, we can certainly have a look at what that remodelling or that modelling of what the needs are and the priorities are at a future scrutiny, or have a report sent out to us. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. And then lastly on questioning, I'm going to go to Paul, and then I'm going to conclude with some comments, guys. Thank
you very much. We've spoken earlier then about leadership, and I'd like to concentrate now, if I can, on the future. One element that disappointed me the most then in the report was on page 21, when we talked about NPQH, qualification then for headship, and also system leaders. In this, it says that of the NPQH, 30 of the 44 candidates from schools across the region met the criteria. One candidate from Merthyr met that criteria. And of system leaders, it talks about 14 head teachers who participated then in a pilot program. One came then from Merthyr. So the question really is are we then developing our own leaders of the future here in Merthyr? Is there something which is different then to the mix then that we have of the professionals in our schools? Is there something more that we need to do then to ensure that we get the best leaders in our own patch?
I think we do need to encourage the participation of staff as system leaders and on NPQH. NPQH last year, the cohort was slightly different because it was the last year of the current format of NPQH. So that assessment there's another assessment opportunity because not everyone went through the assessment, although they'd done the training. So there is another assessment opportunity next week after next. So we should see some more people coming through that. It has proved incredibly difficult to recruit people to MPQH. And if you think about the type of people that we're recruiting onto it, it's their deputies. They're looking to have headship as their next move. And we talk to an awful lot of our head teachers, and they don't want headship as their next move. So that is a real challenge. And I think we're looking as an organisation, how can we support those deputies to see that actually they can be a head teacher, and they want to be a head teacher. And I think that's incredibly difficult at the moment, because head teacher to deputy head teacher to head teacher is a very small pay rise, but a phenomenal responsibility rise. And in the current climate, that's not something that people necessarily want to take on. But yes, we do need to keep working with schools in Merthyr to attract people to those roles.
All the reasons. It's just that the figures seem to suggest that we are out of kilter then with other regions then close by. Is there anything peculiar about this local authority area that it differs, that you can suggest we do differently in future to try and encourage those people who we need to step forward?
Thank you, Paul. I was just going to respond first of all to one of the comments you made about the lead practitioners and system leaders, that we don't seem to have many. I think we can do more to promote that. I think we've got some really strong leaders in Merthyr Tydfil, and I've referenced some of the inspection reports that have come out recently. Coed Erwin and Troy Daru, and the leader of Troy Daru is one of the system leaders. But I think we can do more as a company to be encouraging them, because we've got a lot to share in Merthyr. I did a visit not that long ago to a school where they were doing some exceptional work, developing leaders and developing the outdoors, bringing in families to help with cooking, doing some really exciting things. And the head wasn't quite aware of how she could share that practice. But with a conversation now, she's sharing her practice regionally with Cardiff schools, with Bridgend. So I think we can do more of that type of work and get the message out that there's some really strong work going on in Merthyr, and for head teachers to be part of that. So we can definitely be doing more as teams to be encouraging schools for that.
Thank you. Some hope at the end of that conversation. Thank you.
I'll just bring in Andrea there as well, Paul.
Just to add to that, in the CSE RAS plan for Merthyr, leadership is one of the areas.
Yeah.
So we are working on collaborative structures and sustainable models with the secondaries at the moment, around sort of deputy heads as well as leaders of learning and teaching, and they're actually going and working across schools. So again, it's building their capacity to move into sort of headship within that. There's opportunities for senior leaders to be involved in the head teacher groups. I put the word head teacher in inverted commas there because some of them will come from the senior leadership team. There's been a middle leadership programme, which again, to move into senior leadership as well. Some of our heads do the Estin peer training rather than the system leader route. So again, they get to look at sort of practices across Wales, not just across the region with that. And there's also a fair bit of sort of senior leadership team coaching with regards to the IPs and myself. You'll be aware of some of that, Paul, but also in some of the schools, it's a prime role of the improvement partner to support the self-valuation within the school, and also to support both middle and senior leaders in terms of having those difficult conversations, etc. as well. So all of that is kind of building leadership capacity without the qualification, I suppose, that goes with that as well.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you to my colleagues for questions this afternoon, and obviously to our colleagues from Central South Consortium for giving us some really comprehensive replies to those. Are there any particular comments anybody wishes to make at this point before I conclude? No? Okay, so from a scrutiny perspective, as I said, thank you very much. I think there's some things there that inevitably we'll pick up on and follow through, whether that be via our forward work plan or whether we pick up with Sue and Andrea alike, you know, to just take some of these things forward. But just lastly, thank you ever so much. One, for the continued support here in Merthyr Tydfil and to our schools, and obviously for your presence here today at Scrutiny. We really appreciate it. So thank you to Clara and Helen and Natalie and Andrew. On to your next Scrutiny, guys, but thank you so much for joining us. And colleagues, whilst our colleagues are leaving the chamber, I'll just let you know that during the discussions, I had a message from our colleague Elizabeth McLean to give her apologies. So if we can just note that, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is agenda item number 4, and that's the whole school approach to emotional and mental well-being. And I believe our cabinet member is going to take us through that report.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'll just leave for a few moments to wait for everyone.
That's all right.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda, the whole school approach to emotional and mental well-being. So quick summary of the report. So the framework on embedding a whole school approach to emotional and mental well-being was introduced by Welsh Government in March 2021 and it's included in the background papers. The document outlines clear expectations for local authorities in their role to support schools in delivering this agenda. It is a joint framework from the Educational Minister and the Social Services Minister. Our Raising the Aspirations, Raising Standards strategy has supported learners' health and well-being as one of its 5 goals. This outlines 2 key aims. All children and young people in Merthyr Tydfil can easily access the necessary support to improve their emotional, mental and physical well-being, and therefore are ready and able to learn. And also that all partners nurture the benefits of belonging, friendship, relationships, families and communities in the lives of our children and young people, and all work together to ensure these are an integral part of the positive educational experience. Public Health Wales, on behalf of Welsh Government through their Healthy Schools initiative, were brokered to undertake specific work with schools in evaluating work being undertaken against this agenda. This is a far-reaching agenda and many agencies are involved. To allow the department to have a better understanding of what is being delivered against this framework and avoid duplication, a multi-agency group has been set up and chaired by Andrea, our Head of Achievement and Wellbeing. So just taking you to the report at 2.1 for the recommendation that the content of the report is discussed and consider whether any further information should be presented and noted.
Thank you for that, Michelle. So colleagues, I'll open it straight up to the floor. Have we got any questions in relation to this item? Jacob, I'll come to you first, and I'll come to Lawrence, then back to Natalie. So Jacob.
Hi. So on page 80, 5.13, it discusses about the 6 playgroup leaders, the 160 plus young leaders, and then about setting up a basketball. I was just curious in regards to this report, specifically with the basketball. Was this an idea that was presented to the young leaders before it being set up? And could you also explain a little bit more about the roles as do the playground and young leaders have in their schools, and how are they making more positive health choices and supporting their well-being?
Some of that detail I won't necessarily have, Jacob, but I can come back to you. So Active Merthyr provide that provision. So the whole concept of the whole school approach is sort of going beyond the schools and actually utilising the different partners within that, of which Active Merthyr is one of them. And I did cherry pick some of the things from the Active Merthyr report, which was rather long as well. So around those with that. But by putting the year 6 leaders as playground leaders, that then encourages them to play games within that setting as such. So in terms, does it have an impact? Does it have an effect? I would hope so, in terms of those young people being active within the playground, and therefore utilising their unstructured times in the best way possible. In terms of the leadership programme as well, it's about those children leading other children as well. So that concept of teamwork, problem solving as well, which is what the Playground Leaders programme looks into as well. So that would enhance that level of support for each other, as well as, you know, how to deal with conflicts and making sure that everyone is getting on, I suppose, which is, you know, very needed within a primary setting as well. In terms of the basketball, yes, it came from feedback. So it's actually within the 7 sector of the valley in that respect, but it came from feedback that Active Merthyr had taken from the young people to set up that provision.
Just going down a little bit more, you've got to 5.17. Obviously discussed about the outcomes indicating the schools have a strong relationship with their pupils and staff. Is there any statistics that you could provide that demonstrates that schools do have that strengthening relationship and that they are helping provide emotional and mental well-being needs for them, obviously members of staff and pupils?
So the evaluation outcomes come from the self-evaluation tool that Public Health Wales are working on with the schools. So a number of our schools were involved initially in the pilot, but that's extended out now. So what the tool allows is for the schools to identify where they feel they have strengths. So there is a perception element around that as well. And the Public Health Wales school whole school approach to wellbeing lead works with the schools then on how they can kind of support where there's improvement needed or share the strengths around. So that's where, so there is data behind that in terms of what that tool says. So that all goes onto a big dashboard across Cwntap Morgannwg, as well as then we get a report linked to Merthyr for that. So I think in the recent Snakes and Ladders conference, I kind of showed a snapshot of that on the screen, but I can provide that for members if needed. So that's where those evaluation outcomes come from, is that those are the key areas of strengths that our schools have identified from that.
So that's what the school perceives that they have a strong. So it's not the actual pupils or staff saying that they feel like they have a strong connection. This is what the schools are saying, is it?
Partly, because part of that self-evaluation will be around pupil voice. So there'll be a strand where they'll talk about the type of things that they get from the pupils within that. Another set of data which is mentioned, which is the Schools Healthy Regional Network data, the SHRN data there, that indicates school connectiveness is actually a strength in some of our schools, whereas it's not necessarily across Wales as well. So the secondary data has just been, the new data has just been done. So we'll have a report on that probably April, May time as well.
But for now, that statement's primarily just about how the school feels about their relationship than what
the toolkit is. Yes.
Right. Okay. Just going down a little bit more to 7.1, providing a clear map of emotional and well-being support for families, children, and young people. Sorry.
Sorry.
So will this be an opportunity for young people to have a say a bit more about the emotional and well-being in regards to that?
Yeah, the map is to identify what services currently exist and what supports currently exists. So the group are currently looking at that. So the appendix showed you where we were, and what we've done as a group is to go through what existed, what now doesn't exist, what's gone, what's coming into that path. It's one of the most difficult things to do because it's continually changing day by day, and different support services will come into the arena as well. And certainly the voice of young people can inform what that looks like as well. Yeah.
So, okay. So obviously, it also mentions about parents, children, and young. That's quite a group
Yeah.
of people. So I'm curious, how will the information be collected and evaluated? Because obviously these are people with different certain circumstances and obviously different environments and obviously different needs and complex. So how can we make sure that we have an accurate and a sort of understanding?
Which makes it a complex area that we're kind of working away at in that respect. So the whole school approach has different sort of areas that we need to sort of concentrate around. There are statutory obligations for us as a local authority within there, but also the element around partnership working. So that mapping needs to look at what's available for families, what's available for young people, what's available for schools to access as well. So by working in the multi-agency group, and they say what they provide. So if you notice in the report, there are things in there other than education as well, because the whole school approach goes across, which makes it even more complex in a sense as well. In terms of what that looks like, I haven't got it mapped out myself yet in terms of how we can present that information in a usable way, so that there is clarity of understanding around that as well. But things like the early help hub, which sits in social services, that acts as a kind of almost a front door to some of those services, but it's what sits behind that. And do people know what's there? So do schools know what there? Do the families know what's there? Do the children and young people know what's there? Now, things like the Stakes and Ladders project will feed that as well, to allow to understand what does exist. So they all join up in some form or other.
I'm nearly done though.
That's okay. It's all very complex.
So at 7.2, there's mention about a well-being toolkit.
Yeah.
Will there be an opportunity for us Scrutiny to be able to have a look into the well-being toolkit?
Yeah, to give you context around that, so the toolkit was in place when I joined the authority, and it's kind of like in a PowerPoint fashion where you click on and then it takes you to the next sort of part of that. However, that now needs to be updated because some of it, for example, refers to certain things that were in place just for COVID as well. So that needs to be adjusted within that. One of the areas I've been working on around the staff wellbeing charter and the elements linked to that is well, what's out there for staff, because again, that comes under the framework, healthy staff, healthy pupils, etc. So how do those two resources talk to each other? Because currently they don't necessarily. But again, it's a complex and big piece of work, which I think the mapping and the toolkit together will give us a wider understanding around that. I do like a diagram, but my diagrams are not very clear yet as to what that's going to really look like in a clear sense as such. So that's something for the group to work on around that.
So with the toolkit, as you know, as you mentioned about Snakes and Ladders, it was quite clear that we, as young people, find well-being important. So would there be an opportunity for MT Boyth to be able to contribute to the development of the well-being toolkit? And if we are, could you maybe explain what that would entail for us?
Yes. Yes, if you like, Lisa.
Yeah, no, I'll just jump in quickly because as your children's champion representative as well, Jacob, again, Andrea did a really comprehensive overview of a number of different things in the EPP panel earlier, and I mentioned MT Boyth about doing the new reiteration of the RAS strategy. So I think, again, what I could say quite easily is that I'm sure that we can note that down to make sure that MT Boyth can be part of this agenda going forward, because historically, you know, you've certainly helped the local authority and certainly helped, you know, young people understand some of these strategic elements of what we're endeavouring to do to support people. So I'll definitely sort of support you in that and take that forward, if that's okay, Anne.
Yeah, and I had email exchanges with Chloe back in October to set up dates for November, but they collided and then the conference came, etc. So yeah, absolutely. It is about different voices, isn't it? within that as well. And you know, there's a lot of work going on that can integrate already into that, and making that as clear as possible so that it's understandable for all concerned. Because you are talking, and as you said, you're talking about a number of different audiences, which then is quite difficult. So to making it user friendly is what's needed.
So if we're able to turn to, I believe, page 100, this should be with the graphs. So from 100 to 102, and in the graphs it shows, it talks about ELSA, and from the graph it's quite clear that ELSA seems to be used in every school. Could you explain how the ELSA is able to adapt to be suitable for both primary and secondary schools?
It targets it at different areas around social emotional needs. So they will, schools will use different tools. So for example, it mentions in the report around the PERMA tool, which is again a self-perception tool. So they'll utilize that then to target the discussions with the young person. And as you say, it is one of the most prominent features, but under challenge in terms of school challenges around the use of interventions within the schools. It's all about the need of the child. So it's what the child will tell the ELSA trained individual, as well as what the school perceptions are, what information they've gathered in terms of that. So there may be things linked in with their attendance, their behaviours, etc. within that, as well as then self-perception opportunities, depending on what tools the schools use. So there are different ones, as you can see from there, that they'll use to be able to say, right, that child needs ELSA as a provision as well. One thing we're working on within that toolkit is to try and clarify what each of the interventions does. So for example, what's trauma-informed schools, what's positive behaviour strategies, what's ELSA, what are they clearly targeted at? So a school can go, right, we need that one, not this one, or we need a mix of both as well. And what you find within the school setting is they utilise a range. So saying which one has more impact than another is almost impossible as well. So what we tried to do with ELSA was to try and kind of look at how we could evaluate it, which is a piece of work that the EdSpsych team did to see what that would look like with a small group around that.
Could you also explain a little bit about the seal? It obviously I could see is in some schools, but it doesn't seem to be quite popular for a majority of schools. So could you maybe explain what's causing seal to not be really so popular?
It's more of a curriculum level, so it's integrated into kind of PSE. So it might come under personal social education. It's more of an American terminology rather than British terminology. So that might be a social emotional attitudes to learning that it integrates to. So they might not recognize it as an intervention, but actually would be within the curriculum.
Okay. And in regards to the, obviously when looking at the two graphs in the pages that I mentioned below, would you be able to explain how the statistic was evaluated? For example, in one graph is showing like Couth being not used by any schools, but then in the other graph is showing that is as like one school is using Couth. So I was wondering if maybe you can explain why there seems to be such a sort of mixture.
My honest answer is no. I would say it's probably an error on the carryover from the one chart to the other.
So it's just an error, is it?
Yeah, I would say so. And if I'm honest, I don't know what Couth is. I haven't heard of that one. So you can tell us that one. Great. Thank you.
leave your message and a telephone number, and they do get back to you. But it's like a health and wellbeing where somebody can go through a Samaritans and things like that. But COOT is a service provided for the mental health of young people and for self-interest behaviour.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ah, good. All right, last
Learned something
question.
new as well.
So, just one last question. I know I've been hogging the questions a bit. In the overall findings, it explains that 88% of school states well-being approaches and their impacts are regularly monitored and reviewed. While obviously this is quite a big percentage, it's also quite small at the same time, especially in another finding. It states that 100% of the school states that well-being is in their schools is a whole school approach. Could you explain how they've monitored their findings?
So that would link into the returns that were gained. So whether all schools will have returned the information or not, again, not statutory requirement to do so. From a school's perspective, they'll have it within their school development plans. So they will monitor against that element as well. The self-evaluation tool that I talked about earlier with Public Health Wales and the Public Health, the Healthy School Scheme, those whole school approaches there will be monitored by the schools as part of their monitoring evaluation processes as well.
But you said that obviously it's not your not obligation to remind them to provide the information. Sorry, is that what you said? I think
they don't have to provide. It's not statutory response. So if I do a questionnaire on something or I ask for information around something, they don't have to.
Oh, right.
Give me that. It's the same with data. They don't necessarily have to give that return. And obviously we saw that with ASOS, is that they weren't necessarily returning those things that were not statutory within.
Do you think it should be something we should maybe prioritize, especially since it's about the well-beings of pupils in schools? That it should be important that we know these statistics of all schools in Merthyr.
I don't disagree, but the schools can return, if it depends what I ask for as to whether they're going to return that. I wouldn't say that schools are not prioritizing, but they'll do it in different ways. So they might not have it as a headline within their school development plan, but they may be working on it as an under area. So it's a continual thing because it just underpins everything they do as well. And a lot of the school curriculums in Merthyr are actually built on well-being. And the approaches to well-being simply because of the nature of some of the challenges that they deal with, which is not necessarily the case like across other authorities.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you.
I'd love them to return all my data, yes.
Jacob, thank you ever so much for that. I just want to remind, thank you, Andrea, colleagues, that I'm coming to Lawrence next, and then I'm coming to Natalie and Anna. However, I'm not sure if everybody was available at the beginning of the meeting. Very remiss of your chair. I've parked in the multi-storey car park, and I do apologise. I thought it was 8 o'clock. I honestly thought it was 8 o'clock, and I did not realise it was 6 o'clock. So it's left me in a bit of a predicament. But I can see my wonderful vice chair right ahead of me on the screen. So if I may, just before we go to Lawrence, Gareth, just to give you the heads up that I will have to leave 1:45 to get the car out. I'm so sorry. So we've got Lawrence next, and then in the chamber, Gareth, because I don't think you can see this. So in the chamber, we'll have Natalie after Lawrence, and then Anna. And then if anybody else comes up, one of Jane or somebody will indicate to you who else is coming up.
No problem.
And obviously we've got Andrea to answer questions. And for everybody in the chamber, as far as reflection, etc., moving forward, I'll send you a little note out. Is that okay? Because I'm so sorry. I do apologise. And obviously, just at this point, you know, I love the questioning. So thank you ever so much. So I do apologise. So, yes. No, Jane will do it, but thank you so much for the offer, Claire. I really appreciate it. But Jane will do it and then go on mic. But thank you. It's only because then if you want to ask a question, your name comes up on that mic. So, but thank you anyway. So, Gareth, stand by. Lawrence, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On the report, first of all, just a small item. On the Scrutiny Committee report, the committee date, the year is wrong. You got 2023 instead of 2024. Just a minor thing. Then, before I go into some perhaps more detailed questions on the report, just a general one is, why is there no information or evidence in the report to show practical work taking place or the impact it is having in response to the application of the framework?
There are elements of that way within there, Lawrence. Things like the food and fun, the community focused schools, the active Merthyr, the forest schools. All of those are elements linked in with the framework, because the framework has different areas. Then the universal and targeted services, things like the counselling, through the exchange, those sort of things. The ELSA, that is all practical elements of the application of the whole school approach.
Yeah, but within the report is not stating to what degree that those actions or impact is having. Okay.
Yeah, I'll take that note. There are small impacts because some of them are new, some of them have just been brought in. Obviously, we're going through the first iteration around the whole school approach and what that looks like within schools. So the kind of feedback from the schools tool will help us to kind of pave the way as to what's needed within that area as well. But I can identify some more impact data for areas where we have it.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to page 79, 5.12. It talks about the school's healthy research network.
Yep.
Second sentence, it says, however, key elements which affect emotional and mental well-being did not compare favorably to national outcomes.
Yep.
High levels of energy and sugary drinks, sedentary behaviors, levels of vigorous exercise, lack of sleep, and sleep were of areas of concern. So how can we be reassured that actions are taking place to address these concerns? And how are these being measured?
So again, some of that will go back to the school's curriculum around the, well, it's changed now, but around the health and wellbeing, AOLE, the areas of learning and experience, the old PSE curriculum within that. Obviously, the digital linked to screen time would inform what the schools are doing there. Some of the work of Active Merthyr will look at that kind of element around the exercise. So putting things like the young leaders into schools will help with that element. The work that's going on with kind of food and fun and the families, again, support the things around sedentary behaviour, and making sure that the energies are sort of targeted in kind of the same way. Things like the play and stay, again, involving families, the community, to try and kind of upskill parents, I suppose, and give parents an understanding of what those energy and sugary drinks actually include as well. So in terms of guarantees, again, it'll come back to what the schools report, what they find in their self-evaluation as well, and then also any kind of feedback we get from our school improvement partners when they go in and where well-being is on their SDP, school development plan. Apologies.
Okay, thanks. Okay, moving on to page 81, where we want to be. 6.2.
Yep.
It says for all schools environments. So this statement seems to indicate that not all schools are meeting this requirement. So how many schools do we know need improvement, and how are these being supported by the appropriate agency to assist in the improvement that we would want?
I think again, it'll be down to kind of the perceptions around pupil voice in schools, any kind of data that comes back around bullying, online issues linked to that as well. In terms of the number of schools, I can't give you an indication of what that looks like within that. Some are happier, I suppose, in terms of what the feedback is, but that's a work in progress in terms of what the schools gain from their young people as well. So I don't have any statistical data that looks at where schools are not doing certain things. But we can look at sort of some of the reported in data around sort of bullying or reasons for things like exclusions and things, because that might indicate things, you know, around diversity or reasons why the pupil has been excluded, or you know the situation has arisen. So we can look at those sorts of things, Lawrence, to help us with that one.
Yeah, because ultimately, how will you know we've got there?
Yeah.
If you haven't got the information. Okay, bear with me. Okay, next.
Going back to that question, sorry,
Yeah.
Chief, if that's okay.
That's right.
The Shern data, which is actually only secondary at the moment, is being rolled out to primary as well, but that will also give us an indication around that area as well, because the pupils actually feed directly into that questionnaire. And actually things like the kind of cyber elements are looked at within that, as well as sort of elements around happy and safe. But the Estin reports will also refer to whether children are happy and safe as well, because that feedback comes from them. So a bit of trawling for me to do, Lawrence, around pulling out some solid elements for you for that one.
Okay, fine, thanks. Moving on to page 81 and looking at what we need to do next. So in the what it is, 7.4, it says we're monitoring the impact of key approaches on wellbeing data and absenteeism and attendance. What I noticed was that when I look back at it referred to a report that was put out in September 2021, the last wellbeing report. And in that report, 7.4 also said measure the impact of this work on attendance. So what I'm asking is, what conclusion can we take in this committee from the fact that the bullet 7.4 is not changed from the report that was presented to this committee in September 2021?
I think it's the context. We know what attendance looks like across the authority at the moment, and we know what persistent absenteeism looks like as well, and the challenges that have been there over the last we're in 2024 now, aren't we? A couple of years around that. So the situation in 2021 is perhaps different to now because those challenges have increased as well. So there will be things that perhaps might indicate there is a particular project, for example, that looks at persistent absenteeism. So there's some work, for example, in the community focused schools that are looking at small groups around that. So we can utilize those things to report back as well. But sort of separating them out from 2021 to 23, I think the issue is still there because the context has also changed and become perhaps more challenging, and we're seeing differences, I suppose, in sort of attitudes and an increase in complexity around mental health and emotional well-being of young people that we perhaps didn't see immediately in 2021. But actually it's the longer term impact of COVID that wasn't there in 2021. So I think it's still valid. Hence I kind of, because I did refer back to the 2021 report, and it's a still valid point because actually we don't know what's working well, what isn't working well necessarily, as well within those areas, which is also comes down to the kind of 7.3 in terms of the targeted and duplicated areas. There's far more discussions now before something is put in, to make sure that it isn't duplicating something that's already there, so that we are trying to focus on the gaps within that as well. So it's more about how we evaluate our approaches better, and we do need to get better at those things within the wellbeing arena, because persistent absenteeism and attendance, they're only small measures, they're big measures, but they're within the kind of wellbeing element as well. They're not the only indicators of that as well. So I think it's how we look at evaluating what we do better.
Okay, thank you. Finally, just a comment as well. Why are there no statements related to the emotional and mental well-being of the staff of the school?
Good point. It's own mission on my part. We don't have anything that comes directly from staff. There's no local authority questionnaire or survey for staff across. Whether that's a possibility, I think schools themselves will do it to help sort of identify within their own schools, but we don't have anything authority-wise, which would probably why I haven't included it there, Lawrence.
But one would recognise that it's something that should be perhaps included.
Yeah, we can look at how we would do that. I think those discussions would need to take place with HR and unions around what that might look like as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea, for your answers.
No problem. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Andrea. Looks like Lisa's departed to collect a car. Is there anybody else indicated? It's a bit of a novelty sharing online.
Yeah, we've got Natalie put her hand down, so we've got Councillor Anna Price-Williams.
Anna?
And Claire.
Thank you. I'm going to change my order slightly now, just to follow on from what Lawrence said. You said about, you mentioned staff well-being.
Yep.
When you look at point 6, where we want to be, you've got 5 points within that about well-being. I also mentioned to Central South earlier about language and the importance of communication.
Mm-hmm.
The word staff isn't once mentioned in that section. Can we please make sure we use even just the word staff, just to get that mentality, not saying with you, Andrea, but as part of our culture, that we're always including staff when we're looking at well-being? Because I know the priority for us as schools, speaking as a governor, is about the well-being, the attainment of pupils, but we're not going to be able to achieve what we want to achieve if we don't get the foundations right. And our staff are our most valuable resource, and they really need to be considered in everything that we do. And it really needs to permeate everything that comes from Sue Walker down through everything. And I really can't emphasize that enough. I do a lot of reading about with education support. I'm passionate about school and pupil staff well-being. I was elected as a governor both occasions, 6 years ago and 2 years ago, on a statement of staff and pupil well-being. I had hoped to ask Sue some questions because Andrea, I've seen some fantastic things from you recently in the conversations that we've had in Scrutiny and in training and things online. I can see that there's that focus there from you, so thank you, I appreciate that. I did want to question Sue a bit more as well about sort of historically where we are, because there's things that are coming through now that should have been in place. This whole school framework has been in place for nearly 3 years. Our current staff wellbeing charter has been in place. Some of the information says it was from 2019. I believe it was 2020 because I was part of a working group with Sue that put together the charter. And there's a couple of things I'll chat to you about in the charter in a second, but I wanted to ask Sue about why a lot of the support that is coming through now hasn't been given before for staff wellbeing. Obviously, Sue isn't here to answer that, but that's kind of where I'm sort of coming from with things. But again, thank you for the work that you were doing, Andrea. I really appreciate it.
I think I can't talk for Sue in that respect, but obviously I do work under her, so she will give me
to work
direction
within, yeah.
around that as well. But obviously I was brought into the department to build capacity within the department
Yeah.
as well. So there'll probably be elements around that.
Yeah.
And gaining my understanding of what that means at an authority level.
Yeah.
Has taken me some time, and working with a range of sort of colleagues from the different directorates to get an approach going.
Yeah.
As well. Hence why you're seeing perhaps a bit more output now around that as well. So
Yeah.
it could be well, but like I said, I don't really kind of speak for her there, but that might be a reason, because there were gaps in other parts of the directorate as well, which obviously I'm being brought into plug.
Yeah, I've seen the wellbeing
well.
journey from sort of, I think it was Councillor Simmons in a wellbeing group with me prior to the start of the charter being produced, and we had a lot of really sort of valued things to put forward. But the charter came out of it, but then nothing really came with that. Nothing came to uphold it. There was no scaffold or anything to sit behind it to support governors and schools in implementing the charter. I think that's been kind of a concern, but I know that a lot of what's coming through now will address that.
So the Welsh bits.
Sorry,
I'm just doing the Welsh bits.
Thank you. And I think as well a key thing, because we've got the whole school approach workshop at some point in our forward work plan, I think that'll be a fantastic opportunity for me to bang my drum and get on my soapbox about staff and pupil wellbeing. So I'm looking forward to that one. So with regards to the toolkit that is coming, how are you going to launch this, and how is the launch going to look and feel?
It needs to have some training element, but again, I need to consider that in the concept of workload, utilizing sort of directed time approaches rather than adding to as well. So I've got a meeting with the strategic heads on the 2nd of February to kind of thrash that through of what they feel would be the best approach. Because I know it says January in here, but because that meeting is there, it seems a better way. And there's also a whole school approach meeting sort of coming up. So because it targets the leaders as well as teachers, TAs, etc., so that the whole is how do we get it across all of them within that, so that they know it's there. Because within that toolkit are things like how you gain support. There are things in there around reducing workload and different tools, including things like AI tools to help to do those sorts of things. So practical support to cover each part of the quadrant of the whole school approach charter as well. So watch this space on that one as to making sure that it doesn't add to the stresses that staff are under. And I totally take your point around putting it within the report as well. I know Sue is doing some work with HR around sickness absence and what that looks like and things. I'm not involved in that, but that will obviously lead to, well, what can we do to support school staff as well.
And you've talked about school staff. What about governors? How are you going to support governors to work with schools to make sure that schools are accountable for staff wellbeing in addition to pupil wellbeing? Because it's easy to see the pupil wellbeing coming through the SDPs and on the ground experience of being at the school, but how are governors going to be supported in holding the school to account for staff wellbeing, but also for us to hold ourselves to account for the head teacher's wellbeing?
The starting point is the playlist that's on Hub for all governors that can. That's already out there.
I haven't seen any of that because obviously everybody else who hasn't seen it.
So that's the starting point, because within that it outlines the roles and responsibilities of governors, and it also provides some questions for governors to ask of their school leadership teams around that area as well. So I would say that's a starting point from there. One of the new approaches with governors is to identify what your needs are through cluster training as well. So that was on the back of the conference from the summer. So some schools have already, in fact, the Cyfarthfa cluster have already had one on attendance. So if they want something now on wellbeing or the whole school approach, then that's a matter of speaking to the governor support officers, and then we put the relevant officers in place to be able to deliver that as well. So that will act as a support mechanism for that as well.
I deliberately haven't gone through the bites that are on the Hub network simply because I wanted to look at this with same set of eyes as my fellow.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Yes, everybody else here, rather than sort of knowing other things. So I will look at all of that. And I am looking forward to it as well. Thank you.
It's work in progress. So.
But that's where I was saying again earlier about having a multi-directional conversation and using the language and making sure we're working together so that we can actually feed back to you what's working for us, and obviously for you to let us know what we can use. So with regards to the wellbeing charter, obviously we're moving from a staff wellbeing charter to an education workplace wellbeing charter. Why hasn't the new charter been included in the paperwork that we've been given for scrutiny? Have I? The charter itself isn't there.
Yeah.
I think because I'm probably going to be the one's going to question that or scrutinise the charter, because I've got it because I've got access to the wellbeing hub network. In relation to the charters, I've got the existing published charter and the anticipated one that will come out as part of the toolkit. So in relation to that, as a governor, I expect to be held accountable for everything that I do. In my role as governor, I also expect to be able to hold others, the local authority included, to account for everything that is done in school for whole school wellbeing and every other sort of role and responsibility. So given the statutory obligations of the whole school framework, why do you want to replace the existing clearly defined accountability charter with a staff wellbeing charter, which looks pretty, but it looks more of a best endeavours approach? Does that make sense?
A better one.
It looks to me like a best endeavours approach. So the existing staff wellbeing charter is clearly defined. It's got clearly defined commitments of what the local authority will do, what governors will commit to, what head teachers will commit to, line managers, and so on. It's got clear defined commitments or accountability, so I can be held to account, my fellow governors, the head, anybody within this relationship can be held to account. All of that is being taken out. I wouldn't class it as being revamped. I think it's been completely rewritten, because how it looks to me now is more of a best endeavours approach. There's nothing in there with clear accountability.
I think the feeling around the charter was, number one, it wasn't being used. Some heads didn't even know about it as well. So I guess that's, what use is it within that, and that it was extremely wordy. So the endeavour then was to make it less wordy, so that the statements were clear and there were clear areas within that, so that you can work towards those elements for that. I don't think it necessarily takes away elements of accountability. I think roles and responsibilities of governors are clear within the governors framework. I can't remember what it's called now, but the governors framework, and then from sort of head teachers' responsibility, that's clear within the whole school approach of what they need to do as well. So I wouldn't say it takes that away, but again, it's around a perception.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm looking at this differently, because the majority of you know I've got ADHD, so I'm neurodivergent, and proudly so. So for me, the existing staff wellbeing charter is clear. It does give clearly defined roles and responsibilities and commitments and expectations. So if I was to be held accountable to the staff wellbeing charter, I would say, oh yeah, I've done this, I haven't done that. It is clear to me. But the new education workplace wellbeing charter, it is pretty, it is lovely, it's very eye-catching, but I don't feel like it does hold me accountable as a governor. I appreciate the toolkit will go with that, but it looks as if we're going from old format, clear accountability, to new format. It's a pretty best endeavours approach. Again, it's a perception, but that is how this looks to me with the two charters. But obviously my colleagues here can't say that because they haven't seen the charters.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perception with that, because obviously that it was taken to unions as well.
Yeah.
Because it's a workplace, and the reason it was called workplace one was because of the other education settings that are not just schools.
That's interesting to know. Thank you.
As well, so youth, early years.
I think it sounds more positive, though. The language, education, workplace wellbeing charter does sound more positive than the staff wellbeing charter. I do think that. Yeah. It kind of feels like I very much sort of follow education support, and Welsh Government are still throwing money at funding education support in supporting schools. So they seem to be the industry standard, at least set by Welsh Government, how staff wellbeing should be in school. So I follow a lot of their work, such as the Teacher Wellbeing Index. They've got some fantastic online courses. Central South have involved them in wellbeing courses as well. One of the things that the Teacher Wellbeing Index, most recent one, says is that 55% of all staff consider their organisation's culture has a negative effect on their wellbeing. So I wonder why we've moved. This feels, again, with the charter, it feels like we've moved from an education support charter because they were heavily involved in creating the original charter. And I'm sorry, I would have asked Sue this because obviously she was at the original charter when the original charter was brought in. But it feels like we've gone very much from an education support point of view to kind of like an opposite end where education support haven't been involved in it, and yet they're the industry standard for staff wellbeing. But again, Sue's not here for me to ask that, but maybe that could come up in our workshop going forward, our forward work programme.
Yeah, and we used the charter existed to come up with the current one in terms of it was more about being able to not necessarily narrow the focus down. That's probably the wrong wording, but so it was so wordy that you didn't really know what it contained within there. So that was the kind of thinking behind the sort of areas, and then sort of narrowing the language down, I suppose, from that perspective.
Because the other thing as well is this new charter was presented to chairs and vice chairs in April, in a different format. It wasn't he hadn't been.
It was in progress.
Yeah. But the content was the same.
Yeah.
And there were some concerns were raised, I believe, at that point, about the fact that it's not clearly defined what the roles and responsibilities are. But again, like you said, the toolkit, when we go through that will clearly define that for us.
Yeah, and what the unions wanted with it was materials to go alongside what each area was about. So hopefully with those materials, then the understanding of what the roles and responsibilities within that actually within there as well. Same with, one of the elements is around teacher pay and conditions. There are responsibilities for all of us within that aspect as well. So all of that is contained within the documentation that sits behind it.
So from a governing body point of view, obviously governing bodies are responsible for the strategic direction of the school. Head teachers are responsible for the operational day-to-day management. Who do you see as being responsible for the culture and the ethos of the school?
Well, everyone, really.
Okay, I'm just asking that because I might have mentioned that previously. I would have asked Sue that one, but thank you for answering that. I would have asked Sue that, but Sue and I've had some conversation in the past where maybe it's been put more to, oh no, that's an operational. So I wanted to ask that sort of officially where we are with that. Okay, and then what about staff wellbeing surveys?
It's not driving the vision of the school, isn't it? As a governing body, the vision is set through all of you, but you're not necessarily doing that at an operational level. But when you're talking about the school, when you're having those conversations, you are talking culture and ethos.
But when I go back now and I can say, I believe that is part of what we should do as a governing body, I can go back.
But your role isn't within the operational sense.
No, that's right. Okay. So I just wanted to double check, I suppose, that it is a responsibility within governing bodies for the culture and the ethos as well. So I knew it would be, and I anticipated it would be, but I haven't seen anything from a local authority. It's been, no, that's strategic, that's operational, but it hasn't been clear, as there's been some grey areas, if you like. So with the staff wellbeing surveys, who will be responsible for those now? Is it governing bodies or head teachers?
The head teacher carries out the survey.
And what about
the role of the governing body would be to ensure the staff within the school are supported. So how do you know they're supported? So it's like I've been asked, where do you get that data from? As such. So how are the schools identifying the needs of the staff and what that's saying? So that's the role of the governing body to kind of question where that information is coming from.
Okay. And then conflicts of interest, if a head teacher is doing a survey on staff wellbeing and leadership is part of that, they're assessing leadership. Isn't there a conflict of interest? I'm asking this based on education support information that I've seen. Wouldn't there then be a conflict of interest with that information? And it also relies on staff feeling they've got that voice? How do we ensure that staff feel that they can speak up honestly?
A lot of the schools are actually using the education support survey, because I've actually put that onto the charter playlist.
Yeah.
As well as examples of things that you can utilize.
Yeah.
So there's senior leadership within the schools, whether the head teacher would sit separate to that or not.
Yeah.
Whether they'd carry out a survey on fill it in themselves.
Yeah. I know that was one of the concerns that was raised by chairs back in April when the charter was presented about that, where Cadraw, for example, I'm not saying that I don't know what they said in that meeting, but when I went to Cadraw back in March, we sort of looked at what an ideal governing body looks like. They've implemented the staff wellbeing charter and they use it and they really sort of run with it, and it's fantastic. And it's the governing body that have been doing the staff wellbeing surveys. Now I know that was presented in March in the Cadraw, in the training session at Cadraw. I know then in April when chairs and vice chairs were given this charter, the new charter, the concerns were raised then about will staff speak up if the survey is being conducted within the school rather than if it's been reported elsewhere.
I think the clarity is it's not the governing body's role to carry out the survey themselves.
Right. Okay. So the old charter then is actually wrong in that context.
That's not. That's an operational role. It's
I think
ensuring that the staff welfare is considered, and how are you doing that is the governing body role.
Perfect. No, that's fine, because the old staff wellbeing charter contradicts what you've said, so that does show that there's a need for change in that way. So, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Yeah, we got Anna, then Claire.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks. Firstly, just quickly, Andrew, could you just pick up on something that came out of that discussion in regards to you meeting with the strategic heads? I'm not familiar with that group, how they're made up and what they're responsible for.
Yeah, they're the leads of the clusters, the cluster head leads. Yeah.
Okay. And so those meetings take place not just on the basis of the whole school approach, but a wide range of issues, presumably.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the moment, we're looking at collaborative structures. We looked at wellbeing, we've looked at digital as well. So it helps to kind of guide from the school's perspective, and also they take that discussion back to the other heads. So it's one of the kind of groups in operation to help us deliver things like the RAS.
Lovely, thank you for clarifying.
Apologies.
Thanks. And so I'm looking specifically at 7.3 under what we need to do next, which is, you mentioned that ensuring resources are targeted and duplication of support and approaches is minimised. So obviously what's set out in this document includes a lot of different departments within the local authority and also organisations outside the local authority. So who is responsible for ensuring that resources are not duplicated?
The group. So my role is to kind of oversee that work and try to bring it together to try to gain an understanding across the authority what that looks like. There's elements within the whole school approach that shows our statutory responsibilities. So what are we doing to meet those areas, and is there sort of duplication or is there additionality from the different areas as well? So I guess the responsibility lies with all people like me and Gavin as head of ALN, etc., and then our colleagues within social services. In the main, those are the kind of two main directorates involved. But my role is to try and bring that together, which is why it's a big monster and complex piece of work to look at that, because as I said, that changes. So health might then bring something else in where health are involved in those discussions. So what we're trying to do is sort of say, right, these things exist currently. This is what they're targeted at. So where are the gaps? Or where is there duplication so that we can channel things better? So a recent discussion was around some funding that came to light, and social services were looking at using it within the counselling capacity within the exchange. So I questioned them, well, what is it doing? Is it adding to what we've got? This is what we've got, or is it duplicating? So those discussions are starting to go on now, whereas perhaps they weren't before.
Thanks. And can I ask 2 specific questions regarding community focused schools? Because some, possibly all, I'm not sure, of the funding for community focused schools comes from levelling up funds. Is that correct?
Oh, I actually don't know the answer to that one, I'm afraid.
Okay,
I don't
because
know. Is there
I believe that is correct. 'Cause I'm
government
also
funding from, yeah, I
on
don't know
the
policy.
regen committee, which has looked at levelling up funds and how they've been spent. So I suppose my question was, who has ultimate responsibility within the local authority for how the money that's allocated to community focused schools is spent?
Yeah, so there's a community focused schools capital part, which has gone on things like the schools were able to bid in for sort of community areas like rooms, muggers, lighting, those sorts of things. And then there's another grant, so they're all grant funded. I believe that would lie under the director. Sue, sorry.
Right, okay, thank you.
Within that, but we all have parts of that pot, if you know what I mean, in terms of how we target the money, but she would have the overall direction of it.
Lovely, thanks. And then can I ask what is your initial feeling on how community focused schools officers that are employed by the local authority are working and engaging with schools that have family engagement officers already in place? And is there potential for overlap there, and what's being done to minimise that overlap?
But from what I know so far, and again, this doesn't sit directly under me, but the community focused schools teams will meet with the school representatives. So that might be the family engagement officer, it might be a pastoral lead, etc., to be able to work with and ask the schools what their needs are. So action planning from that should be co-constructed rather than placed onto that particular school within that element. So for example, in one of the schools, I was at their school improvement forum last week. They wanted something around persistent absenteeism and support for families and parents. So I've gone back and asked the team to contact around that specific area. And one of the other secondaries are also working around that, and actually they're going to be based in that school to support that. So those are conversations. The community focused schools have to liaise with a lot of different people, including someone like myself. So I may be doing something specific, or Gavin's team as head of ALN and inclusion may be doing something, because obviously attendance, persistent absenteeism, etc., comes under him. So their role then is to look at, again, what is currently going on and have those conversations. So they're involved in our education leadership team discussions, try and not have those duplications, but actually to add value and look at the sustainability and involvement. Most of the roles around are about getting community involved and how we use in the community resource for that as well. So I had a conversation this week around 3Gs and the music facilities that were available within that, and actually how it's not necessarily being used with from the school's perspective. Well, how can we do that? How can we get them involved, and how can they utilize that resource to support their development as well? So it's about communication and discussion to prevent duplication. Thank you.
Okay, over to Claire.
Great.
Thank you. I have got a question, but it's more of a comment than a question.
Yep.
I've welcomed the report and the work around the emotional and mental well-being with young people as well. I know there's been a bit of discussion bringing staff into it, but I worry about some of the behaviours, because when we're looking at mental and emotional well-being of a young person, sometimes there are different behaviours, and they may just be behaviours.
Yeah.
And it's not to do with the mental health and well-being. So I'm wondering, are people, are they able to cope with that? And how they can react. That was the one thing that I was looking at, and I've written by here now. I'm worrying about the separating, identifying of the different behaviours, because as you very well know, you've got somebody who potentially is just having a bit of I do it. I have a bit of a stressful day and I react.
Yeah.
Or you've got somebody who's sitting there and their mental health and well-being of a child, they just sitting there desperately trying to find release and wanting to self-harm. You know, and I'm just wondering, we've got mental first aiders for adults. Are there mental health first aiders in the school as well who are equipped to deal with such traumas? You know, because I've been thinking about that, and it's the same with absenteeism. Somebody highlighted the absenteeism. Sometimes people aren't going to school. You know, I know this is going to be you. They're not going to school because they're absolutely petrified of what they may be capable of with their mental health and well-being while they're in school, and how are we going to accommodate those children? So it's more, I don't know, I've got a mixture of things there, Andrew. I'm so sorry.
I think there's no, not at all. And I think that's the challenge of the heading, in a sense, and how wide a scope this all is as well, and how prominent now it's become. It's always been there, you know. I was going a long time ago, but ahead of you back in 2000, and dealing with sort of similar issues, but not in the complexities that we are seeing now. And I think that comes down to sort of some of the graduated responses that were in schools and trying to work those elements. It comes down to training. And one of the areas of development that you saw in the report was around staff being able to deal with those. Well, a lot of training around whole school approaches have gone into schools, and we're continuing to put those in as well. The behaviour avoidance training that went in last year. We put some resilience training in this year. So it's trying to identify what, and from what schools are saying as well, of what they're experiencing around that. Having the educational psychologist team involved, they're involved in the whole school approach group as well, and I have lots of discussions with them around, well, what's suitable and at what level. So we're trialing some music therapy in Greenfields at the moment as part of the music plan. Don't know how it'll go, but we're having a look at that, because actually we haven't looked at that at all, and there'll be a body of children that will appeal to better as well. I don't think there's one answer to that. Are pupils able to cope? Well, that's why a lot of wellbeing approaches are within school, and having those whole school approach, like your Nurture UK, like your trauma informed, like your positive behaviour support, those are meant to be that every member of staff are kind of following. Natalie talked a lot about the language with the children around that, and how the choices elements within those, because perhaps they don't necessarily get that elsewhere. Now that's the difference between behaviours and then perhaps mental health elements. So it's being able to identify some of the triggers, some of the areas and behaviours that the children are showing, which obviously all staff are involved in if they're working through some of these whole school approach elements, because some of them, like trauma informed, will have a whole school part, and then it'll have intervention parts to put in. So if we're all understanding that all of us have been through a trauma and that has impacted some in more ways than others, then utilising some of the tools, assessment data tools, to help us to identify those as well. And I think we are getting better, but as Jacob will tell you from the Snakes and Ladders project, that's not necessarily the perception of young people, although other data might say something different. So this is where perceptions are more difficult to kind of deal with. I think what we have got in Merthyr is all of us trying to move in the same direction. Within that, we are focused on upskilling at the same time as trying to provide support mechanisms, not only around the child, but around the family. And hence things like the community focused schools approach, the early help hub, the families programs that exist, the parenting programs, all of those are all part of a very big jigsaw. that covers the whole school approach to well-being. It's the wrong title, really, isn't it, in terms of the word school being in there as well. But if we're not talking to each other about what's happening in the different areas, which is what the group is attempting to do, is actually bring together, and things like Public Health Wales are on there, CSC are actually on that group. So I was surprised it was missed out in terms of report. But if we bring the different key partners within that, then at least we can see right where, you know, where are the gaps. But every time you find one gap, then someone puts something in, and then another gap opens as well, because we start to see differences in those behaviours that we're experiencing now that we didn't perhaps pre-COVID, or we didn't necessarily recognise them previously to what they are now. Complexity, I think, is what we're seeing. In terms of mental health first aid in schools, yes, there was a programme put in place. What I would need to do, and thank you for that reminder, is to look at what that looks like in terms of people who perhaps left the authority to who were trained, because that's another issue for us, isn't it? As soon as you train people up, then they may move on and things like that. So I'll do a piece of work around that.
Can I just come in on that? But there is an organisation called CARE, which every member of the local authority is able to access, and it is a counselling service that's free of charge.
One of the things that will go out to schools under the charter, there is a whole list of things that staff can access around those things.
I know Care First is one of them.
Yeah,
So
Care First is one of them.
we have got something within the council called Care First, and I know teachers are able to access that as well. And I don't know how it works within schools, but I know we have got designated mental health first aiders within the local authority. So I mean, I'd like to think that schools have got a mental health first aider there, or access to be able to get somebody. But yeah. I think there's only one more thing that I've got to do is because I'd already had this because when you were bringing on the staff wellbeing, there was a roadshow, the public health roadshow, which concentrated on the staff wellbeing. So I was just wondering, perhaps in future, in one of the future scrutinies, we would be able to have a little bit of an update on that, how it went, what you know. What was given to the teachers, how did it go, was there an outcome, did we need to do anything? And I think, you know, that would be important as well. But thank you ever so much. I think I welcome this, because it's not an easy task dealing with young people and their mental health. So well done. Thank you.
It was Public Health Wales Roadshow, but we were involved in a lot of the discussions around what would be involved within that, because it was taking place in Merthyr, and because staff are our responsibility as well. So I had lots of discussions with Joe around what those things would look like as well. So I can give you a full update on that one.
I think that would tie in with what Natalie had said as well, then giving us a bit of an update on what is actually available. So thank you.
No problem.
Much appreciated.
Chair, we've got Jeff, and then another question from Natalie.
We've lost Gara.
Sorry, I'm going to have to give my apologies as well. I'm going to have to drop the meeting, so apologies for that.
Lawrence is going to leave. Oh, he's back.
I'm back. Apologies, everyone. I briefly lost connection there. Whereabouts are we?
We've got a question from Jeff, and then another question from Natalie.
Just mindful of the time. Can I just politely ask some quick questions, please? Thanks.
Yeah, mine's very quick. 5.11, page 79. It says the local authorities, the 30 LA across England and Wales, to be recognised as the Build Act certified organisation. Can you explain very briefly what that is? I looked online, but I've got a couple of supplementaries to depending what you answer.
It's the I had to look that up fully myself, Jeff, in terms of it's linked to the positive behaviour support, and it's a social and emotional education provider, as such. So the positive behaviour support team have kind of written things themselves, which have been accredited. So it's allowed us then to certify some of the teachers and the organisations with that crest, I suppose.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you. So from what I read about it, there's 3 practitioners within Greenfields. It's Be Positive under Greenfield School. But what benefits does this bring to the LA?
Yep.
What costs did it come at? And are we then trying to recoup those costs by offering the system to other local authorities if we're the first across England and Wales, which it does appear we are?
Yeah, so Greenfields act as an outreach. So the assistant head of Greenfields was kind of seconded into the authority to deliver that across the authority. And there's actually 515 participants that have gone through the programme to date across Merthyr within that. So it's not just within Greenfields. It has actually gone out to all the schools. And I checked that with Gavin this morning. So the approaches are done at different levels, and there are different certifications. So there are some who are kind of like the trainer type model.
Yeah, there's a 1 day, 2 day, and a 5 day course.
That's model. So they would then assist in that school by being the leads within that school to roll that out. In terms of cost, I'll have to get back to you because I don't know what that was initially. And have we offered it out? Probably not, due to capacity and making sure that all our schools are ensuring fidelity to the approach. Because I think that's another key element around some of the things that go in, because some schools will pick and choose. Well, you need that consistency across. So part of Vicky's role will be to ensure that.
Yeah, I get that, Chair. I think that it's important that wherever possible, when spending in education is in a trainer sort of mode, we try our level best, or we ask the council to try their level best to recoup the cost, and if possible, to increase the ability of the council to earn money from that which it paid for. Earlier, Andrea said there were some people that might have left who were mental first aiders. Well, they may well have done. But, you know, if you're going to pay for training, which is nothing wrong with that, then you've got to recoup the money and, if possible, bring money back into the LA to help pay for other parts of the LA education programme. That's what I think, Chair.
Okay. Next question, please. We over to, is it Alison?
Natalie.
Thank
Natalie,
you.
apologies.
That's okay, no problem. Just a quick one. 5.19, we talk about things being offered to schools. Obviously, the wellbeing training that Central South Consortium offer to schools, or part of the professional learning offer. In the Central South Consortium report earlier, it said that the wellbeing sessions, only 6 Merthyr governors attended, and that's a wellbeing session on whole school framework, so for staff and pupils. What can be done to increase governors' interest, uptake, you know, and can we measure how people are actually getting involved and taking responsibility
on that one?
Yeah.
In terms of, it's an area that we're continually working on, because actually it's not just that particular programme that's not necessarily very well attended.
Yeah.
In terms of anything that we put on isn't necessarily well attended either, which is why we have gone down the trying to put some online materials, quick approaches. So that's why we're trying these things. The cluster, what are your needs approach as well. And actually the Cyfarthfa cluster one was attended by 27 governors. But if you think of how many governors in each of the Cyfarthfa schools, however, that's better than 8.
Yes.
As well. So kind of small steps within that. So that's why we are trying different approaches.
Yeah.
In terms of evaluate, and we do look at sort of the take-up figures. We look at the evaluations that come back in, but what I've also asked the team to look at is how is that being translated into the governor sessions as well.
Yeah.
So how is that training fed back? So it's an agenda item now on termlies, which wasn't there before, and that's purposeful around, well, how, so if you've been on that training, how are you feeding that back to your fellow governors? Because it's impossible for you all to go on every training. And I think we have to recognise that and recognise the position of governors as volunteers as well. But it's not only in governors that the Central South professional learning isn't taking up extensively, it's also within our schools as well. So, and there'll be lots of varied reasons.
Obviously, it's frustrating for you. It's frustrating for me that someone is passionate about well-being, as I imagine most of us are. But it's frustrating for you as well when, well, for everybody, it's a framework. It's a legal obligation. It's a statutory obligation, and it's just a low uptake. So, but I'm going forward, and with the workshops and things, I'm sure I'll sort of feed things back to you, what I found great and what maybe suggestions and things. So hopefully we'll work together in some context of that going forward.
Absolutely, and we are, we're just trying different things. Well, it hasn't worked so far, so what can we do differently within that? With the mindset that there's a lot of things happening in education, as well, that are also statutory, or also will take up governor time, will take up staff time. So it's how you manage those competing priorities, which is the role of leadership within schools as well, isn't it? And it's in, at a time where there are budget difficulties, decisions will again need to be made around what do we really need to focus on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. Moving on to comments then. Any comments on the whole school approach? No comments. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the forward work programme. Any questions or comments with regards to the forward work programme?
Yes, please, Gareth. You'll be aware, Gareth, I think it was you said something about action short of strike is now discontinued. So could we bring forward the working group on more able and talented? You'll recall, Gareth, that one of the reasons we didn't get an active take-up of it because of this action short of strike. So I'd like to bring it back forward, especially as the fact that more able and talented is now being brought to the fore, so we can do a working group on it. Would that be possible, please?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not, Jeff. Are you looking for participants in the task and finish group?
Well, yes, but probably the same ones that we had before, and anybody else that would like to join.
Okay.
So if that's okay, perhaps I can leave that with you and Lisa and Jane to sort out, and then contact me and we'll go from there.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments with regards to the forward work programme? Anna?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, just looking ahead, our next meeting is in March, and I'm just conscious that between now and then, councillors have been invited to a series of workshops and sessions regarding the budget. So I think it'd be useful for us as a committee to understand how that intersects with our work here, and ensure that co-opted members are given the chance to participate as fully as possible in that process.
Yeah, I think that's quite a pertinent thing to put on the agenda. I'm just wondering, do we have joint scrutiny meetings? And is the learning scrutiny part of that?
We've got a joint audit.
Yeah, joint audit and scrutiny meetings.
Joint audit, but nothing else.
Right,
to my knowledge, Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, it's more it'll be a general agenda anyway. It'll be based on whatever efficiencies are being discussed at the time. So it's not education specific. I'm just wondering, what have we got on the agenda for the next meeting? I don't have it with me at the moment.
We've got the attendance report.
Right, okay.
A review of ALN.
Okay. I mean, perhaps we need to have a chat with Lisa then about bringing the savings to the next meeting. Would that be appropriate? How does the committee feel about that?
Yeah, I think that'd be appropriate.
Yeah. But can I just, my concern, Gareth, is in terms of timing, because I think the special council, which will set the budget, has been set for the 28th of February. So I think the question at this stage is just to ensure that any sessions are taking place outside this committee, that the cooperative members receive invites and are able to attend in that process rather than a specific session for this committee.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Okay, is that something that you can sort of look into, Jane?
Yeah, of course, I'll speak to
Yeah.
Lisa. Yeah.
Okay, great. Because it is vitally important that the cooperative members are part of those discussions as well as the councillors, obviously. Is that okay, Anna?
Yes, thanks, Gareth.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, no worries. Okay. Does that conclude the discussion on the forward work programme? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. And then the next item then is a reflection on the meeting. So thank you everyone for participating. I think there was some robust questions and discussions throughout. So many thanks for that. Does anyone want to add to that, please? No? Okay, thanks very much. And I think that brings the meeting to the conclusion, unless anybody else wants to add to that? No? Okay, that's great. Well, thanks everyone for participating. Slightly odd chairing a meeting online, but see you all again soon. Thank you very much.